At the very tip of the African continent, where two great oceans collide, lies a land that has often been called the world in one country. But for much of its modern history, South Africa was a nation divided against itself, a place where the landscape's natural beauty stood in stark contrast to the human struggle for dominance and survival. This is not just a story of triumph, but a chronicle of a country that repeatedly found itself on the edge of the abyss, held together by a fragile covenant that was nearly shattered beyond repair. For thousands of years, the southern reaches of Africa were home to the San and Khoikhoi peoples who lived in harmony with the rugged terrain. However, the mid-17th century brought a permanent change that would alter the course of history forever. In 1652, the Dutch East India Company established a small victualling station at the Cape of Good Hope. What began as a simple stopover for ships traveling to the east soon expanded into a permanent colony. The arrival of European settlers introduced new concepts of land ownership and social hierarchy, setting the stage for centuries of territorial friction. As the Dutch settlers, or Boers, moved further inland to escape British colonial rule in the 19th century, they encountered the powerful Zulu kingdom. Under the leadership of Shaka Zulu, this empire had become a formidable military force, centralizing power through conquest and innovation. The collision between the migrating Boers, the expanding British Empire, and the indigenous kingdoms created a volatile landscape of shifting alliances and brutal warfare. The Great Trek and the Battle of Blood River became foundational myths for some, while representing the beginning of a long dispossession for others. The fragility of this burgeoning nation was tested by the discovery of what lay beneath its soil. In the late 1800s, the find of diamonds in Kimberley and gold in the Witwatersrand transformed South Africa from an agrarian backwater into an industrial powerhouse. Yet, this wealth was a double-edged sword. It fueled the fires of the Anglo-Boer War, a conflict of devastating proportions that saw the use of scorched earth tactics and concentration camps. The war ended with British victory, but it left a legacy of bitterness between the English and Afrikaans-speaking populations, while the black majority remained largely excluded from the spoils of the land. In 1948, the country took a turn toward its darkest chapter. The National Party came to power and institutionalized a system known as apartheid. This was not merely segregation, it was a comprehensive legal framework designed to ensure white supremacy in every facet of life. The nation became a pariah on the global stage, a place where dignity was stripped away based on the color of one's skin. For decades, the internal pressure mounted as resistance movements like the African National Congress fought against the machinery of the state. The events at Sharpeville and the Soweto uprising showed a world watching in horror that the status quo was unsustainable. By the 1980s, South Africa had reached a point of near-total collapse. The country was a pressure cooker of international sanctions, internal unrest, and a state of emergency that seemed to signal an inevitable civil war. The economy was staggering, and the government found itself fighting a losing battle on multiple fronts. It was a moment of profound fragility, where the slightest misstep could have led to a bloodbath that would have haunted the continent for generations. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and the weight of an uncertain future. Yet, in the midst of this darkness, a series of unlikely events began to unfold. Secret negotiations between the government and the imprisoned Nelson Mandela opened a narrow window of hope. In 1990, the world watched in disbelief as President F.W. de Klerk announced the unbanning of political parties and the release of Mandela. The transition was far from smooth. Political violence surged, and extremist groups on both sides threatened to derail the peace process. The nation held its breath, wondering if the center could truly hold or if it would finally fall apart. The turning point arrived in April 1994. Millions of South Africans of all races stood in long, winding lines to cast their votes in the first democratic election. The image of those lines became a symbol of a miraculous transformation. Nelson Mandela, once a prisoner of the state, became its president. He chose a path of reconciliation rather than retribution, seeking to build a rainbow nation from the ashes of a divided past. It was a moment of profound relief, a realization that the catastrophic collapse so many had predicted had been averted by the collective will of a weary people. However, the consequences of centuries of inequality do not vanish with a single vote. The new South Africa inherited a legacy of systemic poverty, educational gaps, and economic disparity that continues to challenge its stability today. The euphoria of the 90s has been tempered by the harsh realities of governance and the struggle to fulfill the promises of the liberation movement. The scars of the past remain visible in the geography of the cities and the lived experiences of many citizens, serving as a constant reminder of how much work remains to be done. South Africa stands today as a testament to the complexity of nation building. It is a country that has looked into the heart of darkness and chosen, however imperfectly, to walk toward the light. Its story teaches us that peace is not merely the absence of war, but a continuous, difficult labor of understanding and justice. As the nation moves forward, it carries the weight of its history and the hope of its future, forever defined by the moments when it nearly broke and the resilience that allowed it to endure.